The hot Texas sun burned down on Jake Morrison as he rode his horse across the empty land. It was the summer of 1878, and Jake had been working as a cowboy for more than 10 years. He was used to the hard life on the frontier. Long days in the saddle, sleeping under the stars, and dealing with wild cattle were all part of his daily routine. Jake was 28 years old, tall and strong from years of hard work. His face was brown from the sun, and his hands were rough from handling ropes and cattle. He wore a wide hat to keep the sun off his face and carried a gun on his hip like most men did in those days. The land could be dangerous, with wild animals and sometimes unfriendly people. That day, Jake was riding alone from San Antonio toward Kansas. He was supposed to meet up with other cowboys who were moving a large herd of cattle north. The journey would take many weeks, and Jake knew every mile of the trail. He had made this trip dozens of times before, but something felt different that day. His horse, a brown Marais named Dusty, kept stopping and turning her head toward the east. Horses have good senses, and Jake had learned to trust Dusty over the years. When she acted strange, there was usually a good reason. The heat was getting worse as the day went on. Jake could feel sweat running down his back under his shirt. He took a drink from his water bottle and looked around. The land stretched out in all directions with no trees or buildings in sight. Just brown grass, rocks, and the endless blue sky above. Dusty snorted and pawed the ground with her front hoof. She kept looking toward a small hill about half a mile away. Jake squinted his eyes and tried to see what was bothering her. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then he noticed something that made his stomach tighten with worry. Blackbirds were flying in circles high above the hill. Jake knew what that meant. Buzzards only circled like that when something was dead or dying below. In this empty land, it could be a dead animal, but it might also be something much worse. Jake pulled on Dusty's reins and turned her toward the hill. As they got closer, the smell hit him. It was the smell of death that Jake knew too well from his years on the frontier. His hand moved to his gun without thinking. He had to be ready for anything. When they reached the top of the small hill, Jake saw what the buzzards were interested in. Below them, near a dried-up creek bed, were the remains of what looked like a small camp. There were pieces of torn cloth, blowing in the wind, some broken pots, and other things scattered around on the ground. Jake got down from his horse and tied Dusty to a small bush. He walked carefully down the hill, watching for any signs of danger. His boots made small sounds on the rocky ground. The smell was getting stronger, and more buzzards were gathering overhead. As he got closer to the old camp, Jake could see that this had been an Indian camp. He recognized the style of the torn tent pieces and the way the fire pit was built. From the look of things, the people had left in a hurry. Maybe they were running from soldiers or from other tribes. In those days, there was often fighting between different groups of people. Jake was about to turn around and leave when he heard something that made him freeze. It was a small sound, almost like a kitten crying, but there were no cats out here in the middle of nowhere. The sound came again, very weak and barely heard over the wind. Jake followed the sound to a pile of torn buffalo hide near the old fire pit. The crying was coming from underneath. His heart started beating faster as he carefully lifted the heavy hide. What he saw underneath made him gasp out loud. There was a tiny baby lying on the ground. The child was so small that Jake guessed she was only a few months old. Her skin was dark and her black hair showed that she was an Indian baby. But what scared Jake the most was how sick she looked. The baby's eyes were barely open and her lips were dry and cracked. Her little chest moved up and down very fast as she struggled to breathe. Jake could tell she had not had water or food for a long time. She was dying. Jake looked around quickly to see if there were any adults nearby. Maybe her parents were hiding somewhere close, but there was no one. The camp had been empty for days, maybe even a week. Somehow, this tiny baby had been left behind when her people ran away. Jake had seen death many times in his life. He had lost friends in fights and accidents. He had put down horses that were too hurt to live. But looking at this dying baby made him feel something different. She was so small and helpless. She had done nothing wrong to anybody. In those days, many white people and Indians were enemies. There had been fighting and killing on both sides for many years. Some cowboys would have walked away and left the baby to die. They would have said it was not their problem. But Jake could not do that. He knelt down next to the baby and gently touched her tiny hand. Her skin was burning hot with fever, but she was also shaking from being cold. Jake knew she would not live much longer without help. Maybe she only had hours left. Without thinking about it anymore, Jake took off his own shirt and carefully wrapped the baby in it. She was so light that she felt like a small bird in his hands. Her eyes opened a little bit and looked at him. Even though she was very sick, Jake could see that her eyes were bright and intelligent. Jake carried the baby back to his horse. Dusty seemed to understand that something important was happening. She stood very still as Jake climbed into the saddle with the baby held against his chest. He opened his water bottle and let a few drops of water fall into the baby's mouth. She swallowed and seemed to want more. Jake looked at the empty land around him. The nearest town was Fort Griffin, about 30 miles to the north. It would be a hard ride, especially carrying a sick baby. And he was not even sure the people at the fort would help an Indian child. But it was the baby's only chance to live. As Jake turned Dusty toward the north and started riding as fast as he dared, he made a decision that would change his life forever. He was going to save this baby, no matter what it cost him. He did not know her name or where she came from. He did not know if her parents were alive or dead. But she was now his responsibility. The sun was starting to go down as Jake rode hard across the prairie. The baby slept in his arms, and he could feel her tiny heart beating against his chest. He talked to her in a quiet voice, telling her she was going to be okay. He promised her that he would not let her die. Jake Morrison had always been a good man, but that day he became something more. He became a man who would risk everything to save a life, even if that life belonged to someone his own people called an enemy. Jake rode through the night with the sick baby held close to his chest. Every few minutes he would look down to make sure she was still breathing. Her tiny body felt so hot against him, and sometimes she would make small crying sounds that broke his heart. Dusty was a strong horse, but Jake could feel her getting tired. He had been pushing her hard for hours, and both horse and rider needed rest. But Jake was afraid to stop. The baby was getting weaker, and he knew that every minute counted. If he was going to save her life, he had to get to Fort Griffin as fast as possible. The stars were bright in the clear sky, and Jake used them to guide his way north. He had traveled this path many times before, but never with such an important reason. As he rode, he tried to give the baby small drops of water from his bottle. Sometimes she would swallow, and sometimes the water would just run down her chin. When the sun started to come up, Jake could see the buildings of Fort Griffin in the distance. The fort was a rough place, full of soldiers and cowboys and other hard men. It was not the kind of place where people usually cared about sick babies, especially Indian babies. But it was the only place around where Jake might find a doctor. As Jake rode into the fort, people stopped what they were doing to stare at him. He looked strange, riding without a shirt and carrying a small bundle in his arms. His face was tired and dirty, and his eyes were red from staying awake all night. Jake went straight to the building where he knew the army doctor worked. Dr. Williams was an older man who had seen many terrible things during his years at the fort. He was not known for being kind or gentle, but he was the only doctor for miles around. Jake pushed through the door of the doctor's office and found Dr. Williams eating his breakfast. The doctor looked up with an angry expression on his face. He did not like to be bothered early in the morning. "What do you want, Cowboy?" Dr. Williams asked in a rough voice. Jake carefully opened his shirt to show the baby inside. "This little one is dying, Doc. She needs help right away." Dr. Williams looked at the baby and his face became even more angry. "That's an Indian baby," he said. "I don't treat Indians. Take it somewhere else." Jake felt his own anger rising, but he knew he had to stay calm. The baby's life depended on it. "She's just a baby, Doc. She's dying. Please, you have to help her." "I said no," Dr. Williams replied, turning back to his breakfast. The army doesn't pay me to take care of Indian children. There's nothing I can do. But Jake did not give up. He had ridden all night to get here, and he was not going to let the doctor turn him away. "Look at her, Doc," Jake said, moving closer to the doctor's table. "She's just a little baby. She never hurt anybody. She's going to die if you don't." "Help her." Dr. Williams looked at the baby again. Even he could see how sick she was. Her breathing was very fast and shallow, and her little face was red with fever. Despite his hard heart, the doctor began to feel sorry for the tiny child. "Even if I wanted to help," Dr. Williams said, "I don't know anything about taking care of babies. I'm used to treating grown men with bullet wounds and broken bones." Jake was desperate. "Please, Doc, you're the only doctor around. Just try." "I'll help you. I'll do whatever you say." Something in Jake's voice made Dr. Williams change his mind. Maybe it was the way Jake had ridden all night to save the baby. Maybe it was because the doctor remembered what it was like to care about saving lives. Whatever it was, he finally agreed to help. "Bring her over here," Dr. Williams said, clearing off a table. "I'll see what I can do." For the next several hours, Jake and Dr. Williams worked together to save the baby's life. The doctor gave her medicine to bring down her fever. Jake held her while the doctor cleaned her tiny body and checked for injuries. They made a mixture of milk and water to feed her, and Jake learned how to use a small spoon to get the liquid into her mouth. The baby was very weak, and there were times when Jake thought she might die. But slowly, very slowly, she began to get a little stronger. By evening, her fever had gone down some, and she was able to drink more of the milk mixture. "She might make it," Dr. Williams said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "But she's going to need care for many days. Maybe weeks." Jake nodded. He had already decided that he was going to stay at the fort until the baby was completely well. He found a small room where he could sleep and care for her. The fort commander was not happy about having an Indian baby there, but he agreed to let Jake stay for a while. The next few weeks were the hardest of Jake's life. Taking care of a sick baby was much different from working with cattle and horses. The baby needed to eat every few hours, day and night. She cried when she was hungry or uncomfortable, and Jake had to learn what all her different cries meant. Jake made a bottle out of a small glass jar and a piece of cloth. He learned how to warm the milk so it would not be too hot for the baby. He learned how to change her clothes and keep her clean. Most importantly, he learned how to hold her so she felt safe and loved. The other men at the fort thought Jake had lost his mind. They could not understand why a grown cowboy would spend his time taking care of an Indian baby. Some of them made jokes about it. Others got angry and said Jake was a fool for helping the enemy, but Jake did not care what they said. Every day, the baby got a little stronger. Her eyes became brighter, and she started to smile when she saw Jake's face. When she smiled, Jake felt something he had never felt before. It was like the baby had become the most important thing in his whole world. Jake started calling her Little Star because her eyes seemed to sparkle when she looked at him. He would sing old cowboy songs to her when she cried, and she seemed to like his deep voice. At night, he would hold her close and tell her stories about his life on the range. Dr. Williams was amazed at how much Jake cared for the baby. "I've never seen anything like it," he told Jake one day. "You're better with that child than most mothers are." As Little Star got stronger, she became more curious about the world around her. She would watch Jake's face when he talked to her. She would reach out with her tiny hands to touch his beard. When he walked around the room carrying her, she would look at everything with wide, interested eyes. The other men at the fort began to change their minds about the baby too. At first, they had stayed away from Jake and Little Star, but as time went on, they started to stop by Jake's room to see how the baby was doing. Even the hardest soldiers would smile when Little Star looked at them with her bright eyes. After 3 weeks, Little Star was completely healthy. She was eating well, sleeping through the night, and growing bigger every day. She had become a happy, smiling baby who seemed to love everyone she met. But now Jake faced a problem he had been trying not to think about. What was he going to do with a healthy Indian baby in a world where her people and his people were enemies? He could not keep her at the fort forever. The army commander was already asking questions about when Jake was going to leave. But where could he take her, and what kind of life could she have? Jake spent many sleepless nights thinking about Little Star's future. He had grown to love her like she was his own daughter. The thought of giving her up made his heart ache. But he also knew that she deserved to be with her own people, to learn about her culture and heritage. As Jake held Little Star in his arms and watched her sleep peacefully, he made another decision that would change both their lives forever. He was going to find her tribe and try to return her to her family. It was the most dangerous thing he could possibly do, but it was the right thing to do. Jake Morrison had saved Little Star's life, but now he had to decide if he was brave enough to risk his own life to give her the future she deserved. Word traveled fast on the frontier, and soon everyone within 100 miles knew about Jake Morrison and the Indian baby he had saved. Some people called him a hero for showing mercy to a helpless child. Others called him a fool for helping the enemy. But most people thought he was crazy for even thinking about what he was planning to do next. Jake had made up his mind. He was going to take Little Star back to her people, even though everyone told him it meant certain death. The Comanche tribe was known for their fierce fighting skills and their hatred of white men. No white person had ever walked into a Comanche camp and lived to tell about it. "You can't be serious," Dr. Williams said when Jake told him about his plan. "Those Indians will kill you the moment they see you. They won't care that you saved one of their babies. To them, you're just another white man who needs to die." Captain Johnson, who ran Fort Griffin, was even more direct. "Morrison, if you ride out there, you're never coming back. I've been fighting Indians for 15 years, and I know how they think. They'll torture you for days before they finally let you die." But Jake had already made up his mind. Every time he looked at Little Star, he knew what he had to do. She was walking now, taking small steps around his room at the fort. She would clap her hands and laugh when she saw Jake coming. She had learned to say a few words, and Jake was one of them. She trusted him completely, and that trust made Jake more determined than ever to do right by her. The hardest part was not the danger he would face. The hardest part was that Jake had grown to love Little Star like she was his own daughter. For the past 6 months, she had been the center of his world. He fed her, played with her, sang to her, and comforted her when she cried. The thought of giving her up made his heart feel like it was breaking in half, but Jake knew that keeping Little Star would be selfish. She needed to be with her own people. She needed to learn about her culture and her heritage. She needed to know where she came from and who she really was. As much as Jake loved her, he could not give her those things. Jake spent weeks preparing for the journey. He studied maps and talked to traders who had dealt with the Comanche. He learned what he could about their customs and their language. He practiced a few words in Comanche, hoping it might help him communicate when the time came. The other cowboys at the fort thought Jake was losing his mind. "You're throwing your life away for an Indian baby," one of them said. "She's not even your real daughter. Why don't you just find her a good family here and forget about this crazy idea?" But Jake could not forget. Every night, as he held Little Star and sang her to sleep, he thought about her real family. Somewhere out there, her mother and father might still be alive. They might be wondering what happened to their little girl. They might be grieving for a daughter they thought was dead. Jake also thought about what would happen to Little Star. If she stayed with white people, she would always be different. She would always be the Indian girl who lived with the cowboys. She might never know her true heritage or understand her place in the world. That was not the life Jake wanted for her. After 2 months of planning, Jake finally decided it was time to go. He packed supplies for a long journey, including extra food and water for Little Star. He wrote a letter to his brother back east, explaining what he was doing and why. He was not sure anyone would ever read the letter, but he wanted someone to know the truth about what happened to him. The morning Jake was supposed to leave, half the fort came out to watch him go. Some men shook his hand and wished him luck. Others just shook their heads and walked away. Dr. Williams gave Jake some medicine for Little Star, just in case she got sick on the journey. "I still think you're crazy," Dr. Williams said, "but I admire what you're trying to do. That little girl is lucky to have someone who cares about her so much. Little Star did not understand what was happening. To her, it was just another adventure with Jake. She sat in front of him on Dusty's saddle, pointing at birds and clouds and making happy baby sounds. She had no idea that Jake was risking his life to take her home. Jake knew that finding the Comanche would not be easy. They moved their camps often, and they were experts at hiding from enemies. But Jake had learned how to track from his years as a cowboy, and he had talked to traders who knew the areas where the Comanche usually traveled for the first few days. Jake and Little Star traveled through empty country. They saw no signs of other people, Indian or white. Jake was grateful for the peaceful time. It gave him a chance to spend more time with Little Star before he had to give her up. At night, Jake would make a small fire and heat milk for Little Star's dinner. She would sit on his lap and eat while he pointed out stars and told her stories. She could not understand most of what he said, but she seemed to like the sound of his voice. Sometimes she would fall asleep in his arms and Jake would hold her close and wonder if these were the last peaceful moments they would have together. On the fourth day, Jake found what he was looking for. Near a river, he saw horse tracks in the mud. They were made by horses that had no metal shoes, which meant they belonged to Indians. The tracks were fresh, maybe only a day old. Jake's heart started beating faster. This was it. Soon he would face the most dangerous moment of his life. But he was also excited because it meant Little Star might soon be reunited with her family. Jake followed the tracks carefully, staying far enough behind so he would not be seen. As the day went on, he found more signs that he was getting close to a Comanche camp. There were places where horses had eaten grass, and spots where people had stopped to rest. Late in the afternoon, Jake smelled smoke in the air. It was the smell of cooking fires, which meant he was very close to the camp. Jake got down from his horse and hid Dusty behind some trees. He picked up Little Star and started walking toward the smoke. Jake's hands were shaking as he walked through the trees. He knew that at any moment, Comanche warriors might appear and kill him before he could explain why he was there. He held Little Star close to his chest and whispered to her. "We're almost home, Little Star," he said quietly. "Your real family is somewhere up ahead. I hope they'll be happy to see you." Little Star looked up at Jake with her bright eyes and smiled. She had no fear because she trusted Jake completely. That trust gave Jake the courage he needed to keep walking toward what might be his death. As Jake came to the edge of a clearing, he saw what he had been looking for. In front of him was a Comanche camp with dozens of tents made from buffalo hide. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and he could see women working and children playing. It looked peaceful and normal, but Jake knew it could turn deadly in seconds. Jake took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the trees. He was still about 100 yards from the camp, but he knew he had been seen. He could see warriors reaching for their weapons and pointing at him. This was the moment Jake had been preparing for. He raised Little Star high above his head so everyone in the camp could see her. Then he started walking slowly toward the warriors, who were now running toward him with their weapons ready. Jake Morrison was about to learn if his act of kindness would be rewarded, or if it would cost him his life. The Comanche warriors surrounded Jake in seconds, their painted faces showing no emotion as they pointed their weapons at him. Jake could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Little Star was still in his arms, and he could not let fear make him do something that might get them both killed. Jake kept his hands raised high, making sure everyone could see that he was not carrying any weapons. He held Little Star up so the warriors could see her clearly. The little girl looked around at all the new faces with curiosity, not understanding the danger they were in. One of the warriors, a tall man with long black hair and scars on his chest, stepped closer to Jake. His eyes were hard and angry, and Jake could see that he wanted to kill the white man who had dared to enter their camp. But something made him pause when he saw the child in Jake's arms. The warrior spoke in Comanche to the others, and Jake could hear the surprise in his voice even though he could not understand the words. More warriors gathered around, and Jake could see that they were all staring at Little Star. Some of them seemed confused, as if they recognized her but could not believe what they were seeing. From the camp, Jake could hear women's voices crying out. He turned his head and saw several Comanche women running toward them. One old woman with gray hair was ahead of the others, and when she saw Little Star, she let out a cry that Jake would never forget. It was a sound of pure joy mixed with disbelief. The old woman pushed through the circle of warriors and stopped in front of Jake. Tears were streaming down her wrinkled face as she stared at Little Star. She spoke rapidly in Comanche, her voice shaking with emotion. Jake could not understand her words, but he could see that she knew who Little Star was. Little Star looked at the old woman and made a happy sound. She reached out with her small hands toward the woman, as if she recognized her. The old woman began to cry harder, and Jake realized that this must be Little Star's grandmother. The warriors lowered their weapons slightly, but they still kept them ready. Jake could see that they were confused about what to do. They had expected to kill an enemy who had invaded their camp. Instead, they found a white man who seemed to be returning a lost child to her family. The old woman spoke to the warriors, and Jake could hear that she was pleading with them. She kept pointing at Little Star and then at Jake as if she was explaining something important. One of the younger warriors shook his head and raised his weapon again, but the old woman put her hand on his arm and spoke to him in a firm voice. A crowd was gathering around them now. Men, women, and children from the camp had come to see what was happening. Jake could hear their voices murmuring in surprise as they looked at Little Star. Some of the women were crying, and Jake began to understand that many people in this camp had known Little Star before she was lost. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the crowd parted to let someone through. Jake saw a man walking toward them who was clearly important in the tribe. He was older than the warriors, with gray streaks in his long hair and a face that showed wisdom and authority. Jake guessed that this was the chief. The chief stopped in front of Jake and studied him carefully. His dark eyes seemed to look right through Jake, as if he was trying to read his thoughts. Jake met the chief's gaze and tried to show that he was not afraid, even though his knees were shaking. The chief spoke to the old woman in Comanche, and she answered quickly. Still crying and pointing at Little Star, the chief nodded and then turned back to Jake. To Jake's surprise, the chief spoke in English. "You are the white man who saved this child," the chief said. His voice was deep and serious, but not angry. Jake was so surprised to hear English that for a moment he could not speak. Then he found his voice. "Yes, sir. I found her dying near an old camp about 7 months ago. I took care of her and brought her back to her people." The chief nodded slowly. "I am Chief Iron Hawk. This child is the daughter of one of our warriors who was killed by soldiers. Her mother died from sickness last winter. We thought the child was also dead when we had to flee from the cavalry. Her grandmother has been mourning for her for many months." Jake looked at the old woman, who was now holding her arms out toward Little Star. Little Star was reaching back toward her, making happy sounds. Jake could see that the child remembered her grandmother, even after all these months. "She wants to hold her granddaughter," Chief Iron Hawk said. Jake carefully placed Little Star in the old woman's arms. The moment they touched, both the grandmother and the child seemed to come alive with joy. Little Star laughed and touched her grandmother's face while the old woman held her close and spoke to her in Comanche. It was the most beautiful thing Jake had ever seen, but it also made his heart ache because he knew he was losing the child he had come to love. Chief Iron Hawk watched the reunion for a moment, then turned back to Jake. "You could have kept this child and raised her as your own. Many white men would have done this. Why did you risk your life to bring her back to us?" Jake thought carefully before he answered. He knew that his life might depend on saying the right thing. But more than that, he wanted the chief to understand his true feelings. "She's not mine," Jake said simply. "She belongs with her family and her people. I love her like she was my own daughter, but I know she needs to learn about who she really is. I could not give her that." The chief was quiet for a long time, studying Jake's face. Around them, the crowd waited to hear what their leader would decide. Jake could feel dozens of eyes watching him, and he knew that some of these people wanted to see him die for all the wrongs that white men had done to their tribe. Finally, Chief Iron Hawk spoke to the warriors in Comanche. Jake could not understand the words, but he could hear that the chief was giving them orders. Some of the warriors looked disappointed, as if they had been hoping for a different decision. "My warriors want to kill you," Chief Ironhawk said to Jake. "They say that no white man can be trusted, no matter what he has done. They say that you and your people have brought nothing but death and sadness to our tribe." Jake's throat felt dry, but he forced himself to speak. "I understand their anger, Chief. But I never wanted to hurt your people. I only wanted to save a child who was dying. I know this," Chief Ironhawk said. "But my warriors have lost family and friends to white soldiers and settlers. Their hearts are full of hate. They think that showing mercy to you would be a sign of weakness." Jake could see some of the warriors nodding as the chief spoke. Their faces were hard and angry, and Jake could feel their hatred like heat from a fire. He understood their feelings, but he also hoped that his actions might show them that not all white men were their enemies. "However," Chief Ironhawk continued, "there are others in our tribe who believe that a man who would risk his life to save our child deserves a different fate. They say that you have proven yourself to be a person of honor." The chief looked around at his people, and Jake could see that the tribe was divided. Some wanted revenge, while others seemed to think Jake should be spared. Jake realized that his life hung in the balance of this debate. "We will hold a council tonight," Chief Ironhawk announced. "All the elders and warriors will speak, and we will decide what to do with you. Until then, you will be our guest, but you will be watched." Jake nodded, knowing he had no choice but to accept whatever the tribe decided. As warriors escorted him to a tent where he would wait, he looked back at Little Star, who was still in her grandmother's arms. She was laughing and playing with the other children who had gathered around her. She looked like she belonged there, and Jake felt both happy and sad at the same time, that night. As Jake sat in the tent listening to the sounds of the Comanche council meeting, he wondered if he would live to see another sunrise. But he also knew that whatever happened to him, he had done the right thing. Little Star was home where she belonged, and that was all that mattered. Jake sat in the tent all night, listening to the voices of the Comanche Council as they debated his fate. Sometimes the voices were calm and quiet. Other times they rose in anger, and Jake could hear the passion in the speaker's words even though he could not understand what they were saying. Two young warriors sat near the entrance of the tent, watching Jake to make sure he did not try to escape. Not that Jake would have tried to run. He had come here to do the right thing for Little Star, and he was prepared to accept whatever punishment the tribe decided he deserved. As the hours passed, Jake thought about his life and the choices he had made. He was only 29 years old, but he had lived more in the past 7 months than in all his previous years combined. Taking care of Little Star had changed him in ways he was still trying to understand. Before he found her, he had been just another cowboy living day. Today with no real purpose. Now he felt like he had finally done something that truly mattered. Near dawn, the voices from the council meeting finally grew quiet. Jake could hear people moving around outside his tent, but no one came to tell him what had been decided. The waiting was the hardest part. Jake had faced danger many times in his life, but he had never had to wait hours to learn if he was going to live or die. When the sun came up, Chief Ironhawk entered the tent alone. His face showed no emotion, and Jake could not tell from looking at him what the council had decided. The chief sat down across from Jake and was quiet for a long moment. "The council talked all night," Chief Ironhawk finally said. "Many different people spoke, and they did not all agree about what should be done with you." Jake's mouth felt dry, but he forced himself to speak. "I understand, Chief. Whatever you decide, I want you to know that I don't regret bringing Little Star home." Chief Ironhawk nodded slowly. "Some of our warriors wanted to torture you and kill you slowly, to make you pay for all the wrongs that white men have done to our people. They said that showing mercy to any white man would make us look weak to our enemies." Jake felt his stomach tighten with fear, but he tried not to let it show on his face. "But others spoke in your favor," the chief continued. "Little Star's grandmother told the council how healthy and happy the child was when you brought her back. She said that you had clearly taken good care of her, feeding her and keeping her safe. She said that a man who would show such kindness to a child who was not his own blood must have a good heart. Jake thought about the old woman and felt grateful that she had spoken for him. He hoped that her words had made a difference. The medicine man also spoke, Chief Ironhawk said. He told the council that the spirits had guided you to find Little Star when she was dying. He said that perhaps the Great Spirit wanted you to save her life, and that killing you would go against the will of the spirits. This was the first Jake had heard about the medicine man, and he felt a small spark of hope in his chest. But the most powerful voice in your favor was Little Star herself, Chief Ironhawk said, and for the first time, Jake saw a hint of a smile on the chief's face. When her grandmother brought her to the council meeting, the child kept looking around as if she was searching for someone. When someone mentioned your name, she clapped her hands and said, "Jake," very clearly. It was obvious that she loves you and trusts you. Jake felt tears coming to his eyes as he thought about Little Star looking for him. Even though she was back with her real family, she still remembered him and cared about him. Chief Ironhawk stood up and walked to the entrance of the tent. For a moment, Jake thought the chief was going to leave without telling him the decision. But then the chief turned back to face him. "Jake Morrison," Chief Ironhawk said in a formal voice, "the council has made its decision. You have proven yourself to be a man of great honor and courage. Any man who would risk his life to save one of our children and then risk it again to bring her home to her people is not our enemy. You are a friend to the Comanche." Jake could hardly believe what he was hearing. He had expected to die, but instead the chief was calling him a friend. "But there is more," Chief Ironhawk continued. "The council has decided to offer you something that has never been offered to a white man before. We invite you to become one of us. If you choose to accept, you will be adopted into our tribe as a full member. You will be given a Comanche name, and will be treated as a brother to all our people." Jake was so shocked that he could not speak for several moments. He had never imagined that such a thing was possible. "I am honored by your offer, Chief," Jake finally managed to say. "But I don't understand. Why would you want me to stay?" Chief Ironhawk sat back down and looked directly into Jake's eyes. "Because you have shown us that not all white men are our enemies. Because you have proven that it is possible for people from different worlds to care for each other. And because Little Star needs you? Needs me?" Jake asked, confused. "Her grandmother is old and will not live many more years," Chief Ironhawk explained. "Little Star has already lost her parents. She loves her grandmother, but she also loves you. You have been like a father to her. If you stay with us, she can have both her Indian family and the white man who saved her life." Jake thought about this offer carefully. It would mean giving up his old life completely. He would never again work as a cowboy or live in the white man's world. But it would also mean staying with Little Star and helping her grow up. It would mean being part of a family in a way he had never experienced before. "There is something else," Chief Ironhawk said. "Our tribe has been at war with your people for many years. Many lives have been lost on both sides. But perhaps it is time to try a different path. If you stay with us, you could help us communicate with the white settlers and soldiers. You could help us find ways to live in peace instead of always fighting." Jake realized that the chief was offering him a chance to do something truly important. He could become a bridge between two worlds that had been enemies for too long. "What would my role be in the tribe?" Jake asked. "You would be a warrior and a counselor," Chief Ironhawk replied. "You would help us understand the white man's ways, and you would help white men understand our ways. It would not be easy work, but it could save many lives." Jake thought about all the friends he had lost to Indian raids and all the Indian families that had been destroyed by soldiers. If there was a chance to end that cycle of violence, he had to take it. "I accept your offer, Chief," Jake said. "I would be honored to become a member of your tribe." Chief Ironhawk smiled broadly and clasped Jake's shoulder. "Then you are no longer Jake Morrison the cowboy. From this day forward, you will be known as Saves Little Star, and you will be my brother." Later that day, the entire tribe gathered for a ceremony to welcome Jake into their family. They painted his face with sacred symbols and gave him new clothes made in the Comanche style. Little Star sat on his lap during the ceremony. clapping her hands and laughing at all the excitement. That night, there was a great feast to celebrate Jake's adoption. As he sat around the fire with his new family, Jake felt more at home than he ever had in his life. He was no longer a lonely cowboy with no real purpose. He was now part of something bigger than himself. Over the next 15 years, Jake Morrison lived up to the promise he had made. He became a skilled negotiator who helped arrange peace treaties between the Comanche and white settlers. He saved countless lives on both sides by preventing battles and helping people understand each other. Little Star grew up to become a beautiful and intelligent young woman. She learned the ways of her people, but she also learned about the white man's world from Jake. She became a medicine woman who was respected by both Indians and whites for her wisdom and healing skills. When Little Star got married, Jake walked beside her grandmother to give her away at the ceremony. It was a wedding that brought together Comanche traditions with some customs that Jake had taught them from his own culture. People from both worlds attended, and it became a symbol of the peace that Jake had helped to create. Jake Morrison had started as a simple cowboy who happened to find a dying baby. He ended as a man who helped two cultures learn to live together in peace. His act of compassion toward one small child had changed not just their lives, but the lives of thousands of people. Years later, when Jake was an old man, he would sit by the fire and tell stories to the children of the tribe. His favorite story was always about the day he found a tiny baby who was dying in the desert, and how saving her life had led to the greatest adventure of his own life. Little Star, now a grandmother herself, would often sit beside him during these storytelling sessions. She would smile and add details to the story, remembering things from her childhood with both her Comanche family and the cowboy who had become her second father, Jake Morrison, had learned that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is not to fight, but to choose love instead of hate, understanding instead of fear. His story became a legend that was told for generations, proof that one person's kindness can change the world.